Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 2 p.m. session here at the Galileo conference. My name is Wendy Cornelison, and I am introducing our speaker for today, Chandler. Christoffel, the user experience librarian at UGA Libraries, is here to talk to us about the Placard Project. As we go through the presentation today, we're going to wait and hold questions for the end. Please feel free to type them in the chat box, and either I or my co-host Mike will get those to our speaker. With that, Chandler, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. So I went with the Placard Project to kind of make it seem grand and maybe a little mysterious. I dropped the subtitle from the initial thing. So this is going to be like an informal narrative, kind of casual. And the reason I'm doing it that way is because I could structure it a little bit more like, here's what we did, here's why, here's the methods, results. But I found that for me, this is very much like a story that has transpired over a year. And it's in some ways a COVID related story because that's its context. And it was just more interesting for me to tell it as a narrative. And my theory is that might make it more interesting for you. Maybe a little bit more organic and authentic. But I do feel like there's some due diligence. I can't just tell it as a story and that without giving you some kind of heads up. So Placard, in this case, is a resource recommender and EBSCO discovery service. I kind of refer to it as EDS a lot. I might say multi-search because that's our instance's name. If you hear all three of these, they're the same thing as far as I'm concerned. Why should you care? Well, it's a useful tool with pretty high usage and impact. If you're interested in analytics at all, it's a very analytics-driven process, both in terms of coming up with the sort of case for it, but also making decisions around how to implement it. And then finally, in some ways, it was a very solo project. In some ways, it was a very collaborative project. So if you're interested in how these kind of technical solutions, system solutions, involve collaboration across units, I think this might be an interesting case study and how we did that. So, and then again, I'm not going to try to spoil too much, but what is a placard? It's a resource recommender and EBSCO discovery service. Here's what it looks like when you do a search. Depending on your search terms, a placard shows up. So ours appears above the search results. History resource guide. You can see that you can get access. It tells you that it's databases provided by UGA Libraries. So that's what it looks like in our instance of EDS. And why do we have them? Again, not spoiling too much of the story, but generally, I'm sure this is true in a lot of places, the discovery layer is just like the center of gravity for a lot of your online activity. There's a heat map that shows our multi-search box, and you could just see how hot it is. And the other areas that we might want users to go to is a lot cooler. You can almost hear the sucking sound of users being drawn gravitationally to multi-search, which is great, right? That was the point of this sort of one-stop shopping approach, but it's not without its risks, which is we didn't quite solve the problem how to get users to navigate to content, resources, services that are not either ideal in multi-search or not available in multi-search at all. So the placard kind of tries to address some of that by not only connecting you to content. So this placard would take you to history databases, some of which will not be in multi-search at all as content. It takes you to librarians, makes you aware that there's a history librarian or multiple librarians. And by taking you to a libguide, a resource guide, it makes you aware of the fact that there is content there that can give you guidance. So maybe right now you're doing history, but maybe next time you're that much more likely to look for a libguide in business or what other subject area you're looking at. So that's the sort of why. So this is in story form, but if you really wanted to demand the linear structure, it's going to be background and lead up. I'm going to talk about the project stages, talk about assessment, and then implications and next steps. To know when to leave or when to leave and come back. A little bit of background. So let's go back to spring 2020. I actually started a brand new position as user experience librarian at UGA Libraries. Before that, I was an instruction and research librarian at the science library at UGA. And this was just days before we shut down. And so I was stuck mentally and at home. And my plan had always been with this position to plan a lot early on, to meet with folks across units, to really start with a plan first before embarking on any big user experience projects. However, at home, with two small kids to take care of, I was finding that the planning was not happening. The conversations weren't really happening because of people's work situation. And even if I could have a conversation, everybody was in crisis mode. So it'd be absurd to like start planning things. And so I said, okay, I need to do some work that's more solo oriented and stuff I could do at night. And so I started exploring analytics that we had access to. And I was able to get the keys to EBSCO admin to look at the analytics available there. And right away, I was struck by the fact that we could access to top, I think it's 100 queries in EBSCO post databases, but also in EDS, the discovery service. And I just started looking through it. And right away, I was just fascinated by what was in there and what it started telling us. So some of it was just search terms that are, you could tell they're not going to be permanently popular search terms, like frogs probably is not a perennial favorite. Chicago manual style though is, and probably psychology. I was also struck by something that bothered me. At the bottom of the list, you can see Web of Science. So technically Web of Science content, you can get to it in multi-search depending on how you interpret that. But if you want to go to Web of Science as a database, multi-search is not the way to do that. Multi-search is a database of articles and books and different items. It's not a database of databases, right? So those users might not be getting what they wanted. And I started thinking, okay, so what can we do for them? What are some strategies we could use to help those users who came into multi-search and really need to get out, but maybe don't know how to do that? Okay, so in parallel, I had also been reading about resource recommenders in Primo. And I saw this kind of image, and I actually ended up not exploring that and still haven't explored it. But I thought, this might be a way to deal with this problem. And if we start doing placards, we should probably do them in EDS first, just because of its traffic and its usage. So I started exploring how to do placards in EDS. And one tip I got was that there's actually a Spring Share placard set up in EBSCO admin that connects to libguides and libanswers. So I did a test run, and pretty cool, but actually a little bit disappointing because it often is off the mark. So here's modern world history. And you might think that our history guide would come up, and instead we get World War II, resources, special collections, desegregation, and classics. And I was finding this with a lot of my test searches, that the relevancy wasn't really there. And so my concern is for something that would appear this big and this often, it'd be a hazard to have this not be on the mark most of the time. So I started looking elsewhere at other solutions, and found right away that MIT libraries actually had a really good version of this idea. And they had a really precision version of it. And so here's what it looks like in theirs. It actually might look a little bit different now because I think they went to a bento model in the interim, but this is what it looked like when I did the screenshot. And it's very precision. It only appears in this case if the user typed in exactly IEEE, or if they typed in hours or typed in like Pubmed. So it's very precision, but you can see generally how it worked. And so I found their code on GitHub. I am not a coder. I don't know JavaScript, but I was like doing work at night and I figured it'd be a learning opportunity. And so I just kind of hacked together their code enough to make it work for us. I didn't quite understand what it was doing all the time, but I could say, okay, that's probably UGA, going to need to be us. That is universal, that's MIT. And after some iteration, I actually got it to work. My first test was with IEEE, looking for this database, styled it a little bit differently than MIT's code. So I was super jazzed about this, and I brought it to our, oh, one second, I'm moving too fast here. A little bit about how I actually made this. So MIT hard-coded theirs, their placards. I'm not a coder. I didn't feel as comfortable doing that, but I'm comfortable with libguides. And I know that with libguides, you can create boxes, and then using their widgets, you can actually make those boxes freestanding outside of the guides. And so you can see on the left here, here's all these different placard boxes that I made. On the right, here's how you set it up as a widget. And you can see that one of the options is embedding it as JavaScript or as a URL. And I just created URLs, and it created a little freestanding placard that I could plug into EDS. It wouldn't have all this other libguide framing around it. And so in addition to that first IEEE placard, I made some more based off popular resources that I was seeing in the queries: ProQuest, dissertations and theses, DSM-5, Pubmed, ASTM, and of course, JSTOR. And here were the first 5. And still just in test mode. I actually hadn't gone live with this yet. And so I shared this with our research instruction team. And I said, hey, what do y'all think? And they were a fan. They thought, yeah, we should probably do this. And then the discussion kind of expanded a little bit. And we started talking about, well, hey, if we can do this for resources like databases, can we also do it for subject guides? And then so allow users based on their topic searches to actually connect to our libguides. And you can see this is our biology libguide, and it shows Ian Thomas there. So somebody who finds this will not only get, biology related databases, but might be that much more likely to connect to a librarian or to other libguides. And so I said, yeah, let's do that. So we started a little small project just to test out the idea last summer. Got a small pilot going with 5 liaison librarians, and they were picked because they were the owners of the 5 top subject guides and libguides. And we worked together to decide on which search terms to use, how to design it, and the text. And you can see here's 2 different versions. That first one is the biology one. It just links to databases. The bottom one for psychology both links to the guide, but it also highlights APA PsycInfo, because we thought, some users don't even need to go to the guide. They probably just need to go to the direct database. An interesting conversation happened here too about redundancy, because in our version of multi-search, we have a lot of PsycInfo content. So would a user really need to go to PsycInfo when it's already in there? And the argument was, well, actually a lot might, because if you go to PsycInfo, it's focused. You're not getting these massive result sets. And it has the controlled vocabulary that you can subject browse and use, which is not as always as possible in multi-search because it's combining all these different subject headings together. So there might be extra value in going to the boutique subject-specific database like PsycInfo. So that was a very successful pilot. The usage was really promising, and we agreed we're going to expand this. There was 2 challenges that I wanted to take care of before I expanded it. One is I really need to optimize the code because, again, I don't even know JavaScript. I had just totally faked it, and I needed somebody who knew what they're doing to optimize the code. So I worked with Sean Kuehl on UGA side. He's a programmer, and he was able to make this beautiful code that was not only streamlined and something that you would be proud of, but also made it really easy for me to continue editing and scaling it up. So you can see on the left-hand side where it says after name, those are the search terms, and then the mappings to the individual widgets for those content boxes that I created. So really easy on my end to continue updating this code without having to kind of understand the code. The other problem that I had was that we needed better analytics. We were getting top 100 queries from EBSCO admin, but top queries only tell you like the most obvious things. So we're all librarians or library adjacent folks, so we know about this idea of keywords and optimizing them, and the long tail of longer keywords and the short head of single words. And right now I was getting the short head of the stuff, the big obvious stuff, psychology, education, and I wanted the longer ones. And so here's some example terms there that get longer. And the longest ones often are the known item, the titles, the articles that embed topics in them, but aren't just saying the broad topic. So I wanted to get at this data. And so we have Google Analytics, but we hadn't set it up to actually look at EBSCO Discovery yet. So using a similar widget to our placards, we actually inserted Google Analytics code. And oh my goodness, right away, we just got like a treasure of all these queries. Overwhelming. So here's just a sample of some of the queries you can get. You can see a lot of them are known item. They're actually looking for the title, sometimes directly the DOI, but you can also see there that you're getting some longer queries that are about topics. So 103 is digital divide and COVID-19. So COVID-19 is definitely going to appear at like a top 100 query, but digital divide is not. And this might actually be like a popular topic, but we're not seeing it at the top list because depending on the user and the circumstance, they're using different terms. So how do I get at this? So this was great, but then how do I actually synthesize all of this to find search terms? Because it's like enormous amounts of queries. So that's where Voyant came in. It's a text analysis tool that allows you to see trends in text data. So I recommend this for any project that involves large amount of text. It is so fun to explore. So it shows you a dashboard with different tools. And this is a little bit overwhelming perhaps, but I'll just show you some of the ones that I use. In the bottom left, you can see that it shows you common phrases in your text. So health and healthcare, health disparities. Okay, so health disparities is a phrase, and it appeared 323 times in the text. That's a potential search term. Maybe we'll just go with health, depends. On the bottom right, you see in context, and that shows you where that term health appeared in the query. It gives you a little more semantic understanding of how it's functioning in the query. And then a way to sort of shorthand a lot of that in the top right is collocation. So that shows you what other words are appearing in proximity to or around the word health. And this is great at understanding sort of subtopics. So not just health, but health disparities, health benefits. And so all of this was really important for not only finding search terms, but mapping them to the correct placards, or to the correct guides, that is. So the next step was going to be collaborative, because I didn't want to autocratically make these decisions. And I wanted a lot of buy-in on this, and I wanted a lot of participation beyond just the text analysis. So what I did was I organized all this data into a spreadsheet. On the left, you can see the broad subject, what I think is the cluster subject, the keywords that I found. Sometimes it involves stemming, whether it links to a guide or a database. I have some suggested words, which liaison I think owns it. Sometimes that was not straightforward. It could have been multiple people. And then I had some of my comments and their comments. And we just worked through this. And this was shared with all the liaisons, both research instruction and collection development. And I'd say I probably have 80% participation. And the liaisons had great ideas. They had great suggestions for search terms. They came up with problems with these, like, oh, you're not going to want to do this keyword because it's a little bit ambiguous. They had great ideas for how to where to send stuff to. Some wanted the placard to go to a guide. Others wanted it just to go to a certain database because the guide might be a little bit misaligned. So really collaborative way to do this, so that I didn't feel like I was just making it up. It took a little bit extra time, but I felt like it helped on the product side, being that much better and more contextual. And then I had to do this again because that was just based off of basically a summer of analytics data. And then once I got 6 months of it, I needed to do it again and find additional keywords that I might have missed that weren't in that original sort of corpus. Some funny things. Just one was I had nursing in there, and then I noticed that was supposed to go to like the nursing guide. And then sometimes I would test it to make sure that it was right. And it was actually nurse sharks. And so we had to the public health librarian, Casey, and I kind of talked about that. And he was like, you know what, that's okay. It's not always going to be perfect, but better be good than perfect. So that was one funny example. Here's one that wasn't so great, that it was like a big problem, was I had RNA, like DNA, but RNA linked to the biology guide. And I had not thought of this at all, but the way the JavaScript is set up, it doesn't care about spacing at all. And so RNA appears whenever you type in journal of whatever the topic is. And so almost any search involving a journal would link to the biology guide. And then finally somebody said, why is that? And I was like, oh, glad you asked. So RNA is no longer a keyword that we can use unless it's the full ribonucleic, et cetera. So once we had all that figured out, tested that out, we expanded it significantly. So now we have over 300 search terms linking to 15 resources. So things like JSTOR, Pubmed, IEEE, and also to 50 subject guides. So that's a little more than a third of all of our subject guides. So not course guides or things like that. So a significant amount of the libguide content that we have is linked to from multi-search through the placards. So I want to talk a little bit about assessment, but I want to give a caveat. So to use Google Analytics, I have a love-hate relationship with Google Analytics. I'm still learning it. I really appreciate what it does well, but it is so not for the work we do. It's for marketers. It's super confusing. I feel like it's often not worth it. So I struggle with Google Analytics. And I say this caveat because I don't feel like 100% confident with the data. And so what I've done to address that is I've tried to be really transparent about that fact, but also show a little bit more data in case that you kind of see different angles on it rather than just one metric that we might not totally trust. It also might be that there's some people in the audience that know this stuff well and might be able to make more heads or tails of it. My main problem with Google Analytics is actually on two fronts. One is it isn't always accurate for some reason. That could be because of changing browser settings that don't allow cookies. I know that Safari and Firefox have gone through some sort of changes that have really changed like the tracking and analytics landscape. I think some of it's just my ability to interpret it and understand it is in doubt. There's lots of ways to slice and dice it. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's like comparing apples and oranges, some of this data and this metrics. It's more like comparing like a tangerine and an orange. Like they're not the same and maybe it's a little bit iffy, but at least we're in the same citrus ballpark there. So that's just my caveat aside. And I'll explain a little bit about how I talk about the assessment. So the assessment actually is in two phases. And the reason is I changed my method. So September 20 to March 21st, I used one method and then didn't trust that and tried a different method in March to now. And I still use that. And I'm going to talk about both. And there's some good news there. So the first method, if you're familiar at all with Google Analytics, is I used source medium to understand where the referral was coming into our website. So anytime the referral is that URL that says like lgapi-us, that's coming from our placard. So that to me is sort of a proxy for a click. And that was great. And you can see that the usage is pretty good. However, I just questioned it. Sometimes this would be referred to pages that are not linked to from the placards at all. Sometimes the relationship between sessions and users was really weird. Like this last one, it's like 19 users for one session. I'm not sure what's going on there. And then you have the opposite, which is some users had lots of sessions. And I didn't know if a session is equivalent truly to like multiple clicks, so therefore engagement, or if it's really just the same engagement, double, triple counted. So a little bit suspicious, which is why I tried a different tactic, which is I used campaign URL builder. So kind of a different part of the workflow. I actually, in the links to placards, I actually added this information that's at the suffix there. You might have seen it before on links to UTM. I had seen it before, but I never knew what it was for until I needed to use it. And that gives you much more precise data. And it allows you to do it more intentionally about what people are clicking on, right? So you can see there at the bottom, this is actually, showing how many clicks there are in this period of time to my placards. And there's no weirdness where it's linking to things that are not my placards. So I trust it a little bit more. Still has the session to user problem where I'm not exactly sure what to make of a session. And there was another problem, which is this only works when you own that content in the URL, because you can't just sort of track another external site's usage. And even though we technically do, I could get express link data like to things like JSTOR and IEEE, I wasn't able to get source data from it. So I use something called link split. And this might be helpful for anytime you want to track usage of an external site that you're linking to. So link split is actually mainly for A/B testing. You give it links and it creates like a sort of short URL, like a bit.ly or tiny URL that you can then randomize to users if you want to do sort of A/B type testing. It also allows you to get tiny URLs, short URLs, and then track their usage. So rather than linking directly to the express link, I link to this link split and I can actually track how many times people clicked it. And I know this is just for my placard because I set this up. So that express link right there is for Web of Science. And this is the URL. And I can see that in this period of time, which I think is like 2 months, it was clicked 31 times. So adding this stuff together, I can, and this is where we get, it's not so much apples and oranges, but it's maybe apples and, oranges and tangerines. I can get some kind of view and estimate. So I stopped using session data because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. So I focused on users instead. So that first phase 224 users per month were engaging with the placards. That second phase, 250 users a month. The good news there was that with two different methods, I got similar results, which was a little bit reassuring. Because I had that campaign builder data, I could also get entrances, which is a little bit different than users. And I got 322 entrances a month. Okay, it could be that one user enters multiple times. That's why they're not the same number. So being kind of conservative about this, knowing that I'm somewhat skeptical about this, I'm estimating that annually, The placards get about 2,500 uses per year, and then about 3,500 entrances per year. Again, it's hard to estimate, and I feel somewhat confident that the downtimes in the year, like in December and late spring, are accounted for because our two different periods overlap with that. So we're not, I don't think we're overestimating this. And that's why that have an approximate sign there. But this is good news, and this, I wanted to explain more on this front just in case we had data skeptics, and I wanted to be transparent about the different metrics I was using. But this was generally good news that these were getting used. But it's hard to know what to compare the usage to, because even though that's like an impressive number, I guess, like there's still a lot of queries in multi-search. So what's something else I can compare the placards to? So in our instance of multi-search, perhaps in some of yours, we have research starters, and those are not run by us. Those are run by EBSCO, and they have been there for several years, from what I understand. And they kind of give you some context. You might link to like an encyclopedia type page, so you know about what you're searching, to give context to the searching you're doing in the database. We have the only ability to turn it on or off. We can't pick which ones appear. But I thought, if I can get data on that, that's kind of similar to our placard and might give us some kind of comparison. Also, it annoys me a little bit because sometimes both of our placards appear, and because I don't want to turn either one of them off, this is what happens sometimes, a little bit cluttery. So with research starters, again, this is Google Analytics having a million different ways to cover up the data. It's tracked as an event, so 161 events per month, which if you look at ours, 250 users or 322 entrances, we're doing pretty well compared to the research starters. But a question for both of these that still remains is, people are using it, but relative to how many times it actually appears, right? So if it's like it's used 0.005% of the time, that's not impressive if it's used 5% of the time, right? That would be not, it probably wouldn't be 5%, but that's a metric that we don't have. It would be kind of hard to get, certainly possible, but it would be pretty labor intensive. So let's talk about some of the popular subject guides, the popular subject placards. So this is the list at the top. What is that, 10? Education and psychology by far are at the top. This reflects, in some ways, I think, the number of keywords that are available, right? If you think of like a surface area for potential placards, there are just more keywords that we found for education and psychology than some of the other ones. But that in turn is a reflection of how many queries there are in our text, how much available queries we have to figure out through text analysis what keywords to pick. And that's itself a reflection of popularity. So it's interesting to think about why these are happening. But education by far is the most popular search topic in multi-search. Our most popular resource placards is this list right here, with Web of Science at the top. DSM-5, interestingly, is quite popular. Comes up a lot. And JSTOR. So I want to shift to talking about some of the implications of this. I talked a lot about analytics, and I'm still going to talk a lot about that, because for me, this process has been about not just implementing the placard, but about really getting a sense of what we can do with analytics, how to make decisions with it, how to get inspired to improve things with analytics. So to go back to Voyant, there's a lot of things we can do with text analysis from EDS, but also from like Primo. We can get Primo link resolver data that can really give us information about what users are looking for, that can inform other parts of our systems, collection development, e-resources, other services. So I want to give some examples there. So in trying to find placards to create and map to certain guides based on popular keywords, I was finding that there were some libguides we don't have at all. We probably should have. And so this is like a sort of short list. It's probably about another 20 in there that aren't as popular, but still are worthwhile. So this is a list of libguides we didn't have that we probably should create. And some of it represents studies of marginalized populations, which is important, that we really get our libguides and our services to represent those voices and that area of inquiry. Another thing right in the middle, you can see qualitative research and systematic review. So that's a trend that libraries are doing more and helping more with that. And we're seeing that reflected in the search queries. I want to give like an example too of how this might be helpful for collection development or other kind of material or resources. So a very popular phrase was culturally responsive, right? And I've heard that. In my mind, it's similar to like trauma informed, but it's like, what disciplines are we talking about here? Because these often transverse different disciplines. And this gave me right away a snapshot of what disciplines might be interested in this. So culturally responsive what? Culturally responsive teaching or counseling or science or mathematics, right? Or even psychology. So this might help with the concrete specifics of seeing what trends are out there and how we might buy or license with that in mind. And just one more example to nerd out a little bit on it. So student affairs was another one. And you could see all the different subtopics there. This is a collocation in Voyant. What I think is interesting about this is one area of skepticism I've seen with analytics is, okay, so that's popular, but is that one person or is that really distributed? Or is that just a class where it's an assignment? Like, or even I've seen this before, is that a bibliographic instruction course where every student had to search for something? And so it's not really, that's an artificial usage. So one thing that's kind of neat is with this data and triangulating it with Google Analytics, you can actually look at the time series. And from this, you can see that student affairs became popular in 2019. And it's probably not just one person, Well, I don't know, maybe there's ways to sort of analyze this and make a guess, but this looks pretty distributed to me, suggesting that it's not just one person looking at this area. And it doesn't just go periodically with the semester either, like during finals or something like that. So interesting sort of metric to look at to address some of those skepticisms about whether these usage patterns are generalizable beyond like a few people. So some other implications. I talked about this before, just like the sucking sound of users going to multi-search and never getting out. And again, sometimes that's good, right? The one-stop shop approach. But we also want users to look at the other things we have, not just for our own benefit, but for theirs. Maybe the interface is better, maybe the content's there. So how do we deal with this? So in my mind, the placard is one way of kind of having this conversation, which I remember when discovery layers are coming out was part of the conversation early on, and I feel like it hasn't picked up again. Maybe I'm just missing it. So I see this as part of that conversation as well, of how do we allow users to see that there is a world outside of multi-search, but being mindful of the fact that probably for like 80% of them, multi-search is enough. And you can see that this conversation is happening in other ways. So like in our instance of multi-search, we have custom links that appear that not only take you to external content, but tell you that's what they're doing, right? Full text from Eric, full text from JSTOR. So you can see that there's a need there, that this desire is reflected in some measure. But for me, it provides some interesting tensions. And maybe I should say balance. Balance is the more sort of positive version of that idea. So I was an instruction librarian before, and now I'm a user experience librarian. And I feel internally this tension between the UX mind frame, which is often favors simplicity, what in the commercial world is called conversion, getting to the goal, which ours would be like full text in whatever format. However, we're also educators, right? We also want users to understand what's going on and get context and be critical about it. So, and I think these books kind of reflect those two different impulses. Steve Krug's classic, "Don't Make Me Think," right? That's the UX like motto. And then the right is like a work of teaching information literacy and critical thinking. And it's all about thinking, right? And we want users to do both. What do we do here? I'll come back to that in a second. So I talked about usage, and that's great and promising, but that's not the whole picture. Other questions to ask are, how relevant were the placards? So yeah, so what? They clicked on it. Was it relevant? Did it meet their goals? Before I talked about as a side benefit of the placard linking is that they now are aware that there's this thing called libguides that they could find next time. So was that an effect? Did it encourage awareness? When users are searching in multi-search and they see a placard, how do they perceive it? Like, is it noise? Is it spam? Is it intriguing? What do they expect it to do? How does that expectation line up once they click it? And then going back to this thing with Research Starter and the placards, and yeah, it's useful, but how often is it actually clicked on versus how often does it appear? Because there is a hazard that this is noise. And instead of doing our best to promote information literacy, we're just kind of causing problems for the user experience. And there may not be the right answer to that. And that might come down to values and all that. But these are some questions that I have that might have implications for future testing. I'll be honest and say that I probably won't get to most of these or any of these. And there's a reason why, and I'll get to that in a second. But the methods that might come up for these are usability testing, interviews and surveys can get at this, some kind of qualitative data as well as some quantitative. Where to assess? So you can do the assessment in multi-search, in EDS, which we've done a lot, especially like right now we're studying the Find It button, and we're using a placard actually to get people to click on the survey. You could do it in libguides because that's the end goal. And we could say, hey, how'd you get here? And one of the options could be the placards and ask questions about that. But I think a big thing here, it goes back to this tension between UX and information literacy, or the balance between UX and information literacy. And there's actually a framework called learning experience design that I just started learning about, getting hip to, LX design, which provides a framework for thinking about these kind of things. And it might have, it might be a useful way to approach some of our assessment that gets at this tension. And here's their website, lxd.org. You can see that tote bag says everything we learn comes from experience. So sort of a nice integration of UX and instructional design as our way of thinking through information literacy. So before I said I might not get to all the usability methods, and here's why. A big question is, how does this fit in with EBSCO beta? So I'm not sure what the timeline is, but at some point, this is going to be a reckoning. And we were an early beta partner testing it out. We decided to not go with it, at least for now. And I didn't get the sense that they wanted placards in there. I asked and they said, that's not an option yet. And I think some of that is aesthetic and interface design. It's very minimal, very streamlined. They don't want our janky placard messing up their beautiful interface. I think it's also naive to think that EBSCO wants you to leave EBSCO's platform, right? They want you to stay in there, and this placard is all about getting you out contextually. So that's a little bit of an issue. Despite that, I do think it would be kind of great for us to advocate with EBSCO this kind of service, not necessarily this version of the placard, but this idea that, yes, we know EBSCO, you want to keep people in your platform, but you also have a huge gravitational pull, which is great, but it also is a problem in terms of getting users to use the rest of our interface. So how can we be better partners in terms of providing opportunities for users not to just use your platform, to get to our content, to get to our services? So I hope that, and again, I don't want to be naive, but I hope that maybe they provide a way, even if it's not the widget, which it is now, which is kind of the Wild West, I can make it look however I want. Maybe they manage it more, but it'd be really great if they could create a workflow that allows you to find search terms, map them to guides, create some kind of customized text or design for that guide to really facilitate this kind of navigation, both within the multi-search, but also outside of the multi-search and into our sort of broader ecosystem. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Chandler. Wendy had to leave, so I'm kind of taking over the host role. I'm looking in, if anyone has any questions for Chandler, feel free to type them in the chat and I will read them out.
Thanks, Mike.
Mm-hmm. And I actually have some questions myself, but I'll wait for others. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and ask one of the questions I had, and then gives others a chance to type theirs out. So at Galileo, we actually have some placards set up in EDS. We have a few. We have one for like New Georgia Encyclopedia, another for Gale legal forms, another for Mango languages. A lot of those are set up in the public libraries, for the public libraries. And we've actually used, EBSCO has an exact match placard that they've set up for us. And I was curious if you had looked at that, and if you were aware of that, and if so, if there was a reason you decided to set up your placards the way you have versus going through EBSCO.
Yeah, well, at the time that I was exploring this, I did know about the New Georgia one, and from what I understood, that was sort of like paid for with EBSCO, like it was like an additional kind of service. And then with the Spring Share, I saw that and was disappointed. So I think I was just at the time looking for the best resource that I could start then and there.
Yeah.
So yes, I wasn't necessarily aware of the exact match ones, but I will say that what I liked about MIT's was that I could run with it and that I could tweak it to make it not just an exact match, but kind of a more loose if this search term appears anywhere in the query. So, but I would be interested in talking to you more about that and seeing if that might work better, if there was ways to work with EBSCO to do what we've done, but work with them to make it work as well. Because like, there's some examples where I would like, for example, I would like it to not, I like it to not be both the research starter and the placard. That's a little bit busy. And so maybe with working with EBSCO, we can make it so that they can set it up so that one is suppressed if the other one appears. So I'd be interested in talking with you and them about that.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, the placards that we have set up with them, they've originally they had a placard builder that we could just go to and build our own placards. But they have since sort of brought that in-house. So we have to, any placards we need set up, we go through them, but there's no additional charge for those.
Okay.
It's part of the EDS subscription. You're just, you're sort of at, you have to submit tickets, and any tweaks you make, you have to go through them. So, setting it up, may take a little longer than, especially if you're making a lot of tweaks with all the placards you have set up, it would be quicker to do what you're doing, but it is possible to go through EBSCO. And I have also asked them about the, because it's come up before, is this displaying multiple placards? Because we've actually seen with one of our placards for Learning Express Library that the same search term may
Trigger multiple
placards. And so it's not, well, I think I've asked about research starters too, but they basically let me know there's not a way to dedupe them or prioritize them at this point. That may be something they're working on.
Yeah, we called that turtle stacking at first, because at one point we had like 3 in a row in our test version. And that was one thing that our programmer, Sean, was able to figure out a way to sort of, I didn't mention this before, but one solution we had for, at least with our placard, was to create a list, an ordered list. And so whatever the first one would appear, the script would stop. It wouldn't look at the rest of the script. So only the first placard appears. And that solved another problem for us, which is that, let's say you're like studying education of mathematics, right? Like that's 2 different placards potentially, education and mathematics. And so the order would matter to us, which one we want to have preferred. And so I put things that were more like foundational disciplines with like methods at the top. So education comes before math, because if you're doing a math education search, you might not want the math database because it might not have the educational material, but you might, getting ERIC and other education databases might have it because those are the methods. And so I tried to put those sort of foundational, I don't know what the right term is, but like the foundational disciplines at the top. And so the order mattered a lot. And that was sort of a byproduct of the way that Sean had set that up for us.
That's interesting. Yeah, another, just to give you some more info on the EBSCO's placard, to my knowledge, there's no way, it has to be exact match, so there's no partial matching. So that was one challenge, is when we were setting up, especially for Mango languages, we were having to detail every variation that someone
Yeah,
may type, and that was just sort of,
pretty.
you know, it was, you know, it's like, did I get everything? Am I missing anything? So having the partial matching would be really nice.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have nearly the amount of usage if we did that. You know, we probably wouldn't even have like a tenth of our usage.
Yeah. And that's maybe EBSCO is working to, yeah, I'm not sure what EBSCO's plans are, because I know that with the new, like you mentioned, in the new EDS, you know, other type of widgets like Ask a Librarian widgets that people may have set up, they are, at least the last time I asked about them, they're bringing those into that, in your screenshot there, there's like a user dashboard on the left-hand side, and they're playing, at least, you know, this was a year or so ago, they're bringing the widgets into that area. And so, you know, as far as where that, you know, what that means for the placards, I'm not sure. I haven't asked about that, um, but you know, I know that we at Galileo, we are also going to a bento box design. So at least for the majority of our users, we're hoping that the fact that we'll have a true multi-search that's going to search EDS and databases, that at least for databases, as long as there's keywords set up for the databases, if someone searches, you know, for those keywords, it'll display the databases in a separate bento along with the EDS results. So we're hoping that will help,
Yeah,
you know, discoverability as well.
I think there's a,
It looks like there a question came up. Eileen says, "What is a bento box design?" Okay, what that is when you run a search, it will split all your results into separate little boxes. So you would have a box for ebooks, a box for articles, a box for journals, and then in our case, well, we'd also have a box for databases, which wouldn't be sourced from EDS, but it would be your Galileo databases. So that's something that we're working on, and we're going to be releasing the beta of that in July. So we won't default people to that, but starting in July, you'll have the option of toggling that on. And so at that point, we'll get feedback from users to see, you know, what they think, if there's any things they like, things they don't like, and then we'll be building on that. But this is, you know, phase one. Will there be opt out for people searching on a phone? I don't. In the beta, it's completely optional. You can turn it on or off. As far as when it becomes the, sorry, I don't mean to hijack the questions, but I can, Elena, I can answer any other questions. But it's built to work on mobile just like it does on the desktop. But you can opt out in July to not use the beta if you don't like. And if, you know, if you try it out on your phone and it doesn't quite work, you know, that's definitely feedback we would want to hear.
I'm curious if you could tell us more about how the keyword, because this is like something I've kind of explored with the Placards project, how the keyword matching works. So if a user types in uses a search term, is that what might trigger the database recommendations in the bento or the journal recommendations? Or do you have other ways of knowing what subject they're searching for?
It's going to be based off their search term. So basically what it will do is, if let's say someone types in academic, well, it'll find academic search complete from the databases, but then it will also execute an EDS search for academic. And then you could also have in for a database, you can have additional keywords set up. So it will also match the keyword against the database name and any additional keywords that are set up for that database. So if, let's say, for just Learning Express library, for example, that's what a lot of public libraries have. You could search for SAT, and SAT is not the database name, but it could be set up as a keyword, as a type of test that can be that is offered from that database. So it would match against that. So there's it'll search differently depending on what the source is of the bento.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I have some ideas. Maybe I'll talk to you about them at a different time, about how to do that in additional ways. But they may not be feasible, but I'd be interested in talk to you about them.
Yeah, we're definitely. I mean, we're again phase one, so we are definitely looking for feedback and anything that can be used to improve. We're sort of, if anyone has gone to Smith College, they have a bento, their library uses a bento box, and so we're kind of basing our bento experience around theirs. It's going to be different. They don't have a database bento, but that's kind of been our model. We're not quite to where they are. They have customizations where you can turn off different bentos, turn on or off bentos, and you can ultimately, we want people to be able to have the bento layout exactly the way they want, and then save their settings in some way. But anyway, I don't want to hijack your session, but I guess it's related in some way. Does anyone else have any questions for Chandler? I have another quick one. Are you setting these up, these placards, are you adding those to the branding footer of a profile, or in the widgets area?
The widgets.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's where I found the New Georgia Encyclopedia placard, and I just treated it the same way.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, and Chandler, if you have any more questions for me about the EBSCO, we can take that offline. I'll be happy to discuss more with you. But we have about 6 minutes left. If anyone else has any questions.
You can also email me if you want. I'm more than happy to answer them if you're interested in setting something like this up, or just answering questions. I'm more than happy to do that off in email land.
Okay, well, doesn't look like there's any more questions right now, but Chandler, thanks for sharing the placards that you've set up. It's really interesting. I honestly, for me, I thought you were going to be talking about EBSCO placards, but then I saw you did something completely different, and I was like, "Whoa, okay, cool." So that's cool. But
I'm sure if I just say sorry, or you're welcome. But
no, I was looking forward to it. So I appreciate you sharing with us all what you've done, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your conference, or what's left of it. One session left. Take care.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mike.